Hello, everyone, and welcome to Feedstuffs 365. I'm Ann Hess. Tariffs, trade agreements, immigration policy, these aren't just headlines, they're shaping the outlook for beef and other protein markets. Joining us today to talk about the markets and what's likely ahead is David Boussios, head economist with DecisionNext. Welcome, David, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Ann. Thanks for having me.
Before we jump into today's discussion, I'd like to remind the audience if you have any questions for David, you can post those there in the chat. Or if you're tuning in via social media, you can post those there in the comments. So, David, let's start by having you tell us a little bit about Decision Next and the role that you play within the company.
Sure thing. Yeah. So DecisionNext. So we are a best-in-class AI kind of software analytics company. So at the heart of what we do is kind of try to push the frontier of analytics and push the frontier of how we think of data, how we integrate that into business processes and kind of improve decisions. I guess that's kind of, I would say, our high level. Uh, I think we specialize. So our customers run the gambit from processors to distributors to grocery stores to restaurants. So anybody that's in that food sector that's buying a lot of commodities, making decisions, and trying to kind of improve what they're doing. Uh, that's kind of what we do. And I guess my role in that is, so I am the head economist here at DecisionNext. I also lead our science and customer success team. So I think kind of for those not familiar in kind of this software as a service business model or what that kind of means, is my role is kind of take what we're doing in those really kind of cool and advanced models and then apply it to business case. So as kind of the economist, I kind of have this background of looking at models, looking at data, and then figuring out how to turn that into better margins for companies. That's kind of, I guess, the high level of that. I guess to kind of maybe talk a little more into that as well is what we try to do, or kind of why I'm here. So I spent about 5 to 6 years at the USDA. I worked half of that time was with the Economic Research Service, and then half of that time was with the Office of Chief Economists. So I spent some time really diving into markets, models, policy. Kind of, I was part of the team that did the monthly WASD report, and I had led the macro and the trade components of that. But I think what I came to DecisionNext and what I really want to do is continue to kind of advance and improve how we use data in making decisions. And I think that's really what we're trying to do. And I don't know, that is my day to day. It's pretty fun. It's challenging. Markets are always moving. Markets are always changing. The data sometimes helps. It always helps. Sometimes it's hard to decipher what's going on, but that's the fun of it. That's the challenge of it. And that's, I think, where we try to live. Yeah.
Very good. Yeah, speaking of markets, when we're looking at the protein sector, a lot of things are going on. What are things that are most on your radar at this time?
Yeah. I mean, I think most whenever we think about kind of these markets, we often kind of think of it from this kind of the margin perspective. Where is the margin at the producer side? If I'm a hog farmer or a cattle farmer or cow calf operation, I'm putting inputs in, I'm getting outputs later, and whenever those margins start to change, we start to see changes in behavior. I think at the same time, whenever those margins are happening or changing at the processor side, or really even the consumer side, like the more we look and analyze at those margins, the better we can kind of reveal and understand what's going on in markets. I mean, I think particular the most important margin, I guess maybe we've been surprised with in the market has been around the, is that consumer side. We knew there would be tightness in the beef market. We've seen, I think everybody sees the changes in supply where we're down 8 to 10%, I think, on the supply number year over year, but we're still seeing record high cattle prices, but at the same time, we're seeing record high beef prices. Our beef trim is through the roof. There's all sorts of cuts that are through the roof in terms of prices heading into this kind of 4th of July weekend. But I think the surprising part is the consumer's not really balking. We're seeing this really strong demand that's really patterned with the really high cattle prices, and the cattle prices are going up. And I think the consumer is following along. And I guess as we head out of as we head out of 4th of July, the question is, which is that still going to happen? Is the consumer still going to come back and still pay 30% where they were a year ago into August? And if that happens, what does that do to our live cattle prices? What's that do to our feeder costs? I think the same side probably on the cutout. We started the year pretty high for a January number. We came in kind of flat, but then in the past month, it's really climbed up. So how is that going to impact? I think we know seasonal demand is anticipated, but it's going to come down. But again, all this is the consumer's pretty strong. The consumer's not appearing to balk at high prices, because if you look at chicken, it's pretty much the same story as well. It's come down a little bit in the past week or two, but yeah, I guess I'm just watching that consumer dollar.
How about the long term, the remainder of 2025? Are you expecting any significant market shifts when it comes to the protein sector?
I mean, yeah, I think they'll definitely come down from these seasonal highs. We typically see this strong seasonal pattern around 4th of July, around those summer months where we're grilling or maybe eating out or enjoying the warm weather. But I think, as because this is largely, I think, driven by the consumer, I don't see us really faltering too much further. I mean, the seasonal will come down, we'll have lower prices, but that strong consumer dollar, unless something dramatically changes on the macro front, I don't know. I don't see too much shift there. Yeah.
So, switching topics here a bit, I mean, we're
Mhm.
hearing a lot about the weight loss industry embracing protein. This is an important component of their pharma aid programs. Is this causing significant shift in consumer buying habits?
I would say it's a great question. It's a hard question to answer. It's as much as so what we do is ultimately like we're trying to get data. We're trying to use data to make decisions, and we're trying to do it in this kind of consistent, repeatable way. Or I think, like, without data, it's really hard to kind of speculate. And I think by getting data, we try to, I guess, get that pattern, understand what's going on, and kind of feed that to our customers so that they can better grow and not. And I think on this question, it's just the data is really hard. The data is not quite there. I guess my wife is a nutrition food science PhD, and we have lots of discussions about what's happening. Why are the consumers changing? How are we viewing it? What kind of data? And it's just not that available. So what we try to do is just look at prices. We look at these correlations. We get this kind of our AI tools to really deep in, find the behavior, find the correlations, and then explain it and drive our forecasts. So I guess it's probably kind of a long answer to say is consumer seems strong. and I don't know if that's because of income. I don't know if it's shift, but we'll see.
They're buying meat no matter what, if they're on the weight
Yeah.
loss program or not. What about current trade dynamics? What's our export markets looking like?
Yeah. So it's, I guess, the export market, right? So I'd say so the one thing, I guess, probably where we try to differentiate ourselves, and I think one of the differentiator of our software and our tools, or kind of our company, is kind of like our ability to take forecasts, run simulations, and then analyze how those move and change. And I say that because coming from kind of the academic or public role, where we kind of take this market shock, where someone says, you have the Secretary of Ag or somebody below them saying, hey, what happens with this trade policy? What's that going to do to pork markets? We can answer that, and it helps, and we can kind of guide that policy discussion. But it's really becomes a more challenging problem when you're at the customer side, because most customers aren't buying full cattle or full hogs or anything. They're buying specific products. So what we try to do with our kind of tool and software is simulate and analyze that, and kind of look at spreads and variations, so that when you're not just looking at, oh, what happens to this necessary policy shock, but it's what happened in this spread. Because when we start to understand these spreads, we can start to see a bit more of the behavior and patterns in markets. And I'm saying that in a sense because on the beef side, one of the major trades, not necessarily on the tariff side, I guess, one of the major trade components we're looking at is that spread between Australian or foreign imports on lean beef and U.S. domestic supply, where we're seeing a huge amount of Australian imports coming into the U.S. to kind of fill that gap that we're having with lower cow supplies. And I think as we continue to watch that, that's going to be important. Yeah, I guess an alternatively, or maybe if I'm maybe continuing to talk on it, I guess is that challenge in some of these markets is I think there's been a lot of talk around shutdowns and impacts from trade to China, but I think what makes it challenging and interesting is the substitutability of the product. So if we might be shipping some products to China, that might just end up changing and rerouting, changing patterns or rerouting trade patterns, or you might start grinding some of those cuts in, which would then disrupt the Australian trade. And it's kind of just this whole mess, but fun mess, I guess, is that. And I guess if anybody is curious or interested or excited, I guess we tend to point and tell our customers to think about the alternatives, think about spreads, think about the more we kind of look at those spread margins, we start to reveal more information. And I think our tool really helps us get to that quicker.
Speaking of policies and looking at your data, you see labor immigration policies impacting the egg workforce.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty widely, or there was the plant that was shut down, I think a month or so ago, that had a large immigrant population. The more that happens, the more we're going to see shutdowns, and the more we see that, we're going to start to see changes in those margins that I was talking about. As the supply comes down, if you reduce a whole bunch of processing capacity, that's going to reduce the demand on for meat, which is going to change what happens to the producer, because now they can't have as much cattle. And then you're also going to probably expand the margin on the consumer, because now there's less beef going out while the demand isn't really changing. So it's interesting. I think if we want to keep the markets running efficient, we have to keep the facilities running. And shut down the immigration is not going to help that.
So what do you see next for food manufacturers as far as navigating these rising costs and shifting regulations?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's an open question. I guess if you asked me 1 or 2 months ago, I might have probably had a different opinion. I think I guess maybe that just speaks to the fluidity of the markets. But so I'm based here in DC, and having come from the government, I kind of stay attuned to some of these conversations and some of the people, and some of my neighbors are the people in these conversations. And I think 2 months ago, I think there was a lot of talk, and there was a lot of eagerness and excitement to change what's happening. I think that happened with any administration that comes in. They want to push, they want to make changes, they want to make improvements, they want to do things, they want to implement their agenda. But I think what we're probably seeing to some degree is some realization that some of these changes are hard. Some of these changes are big, and I think for better and for worse, some of my neighbors and the people around me are kind of in tune to not make changes, because changes are really costly. Changes are costly for businesses, for all of it. Any of that uncertainty is costly. So I think there's a lot of reason the status quo exists. And I guess maybe 2 months now into it, I don't know if it doesn't appear to me like the administration is willing to take on some of these movements with the force that they would probably need to really make big changes.
I'd like to remind the audience, if you have any questions for David, you can post those there in the chat, and if you're tuning in via social media, post those there in the comments. David, as we wrap up our conversation today, any key takeaways to leave our audience with here today?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the key takeaways is to continue to stay on top of markets, continue to stay on top of the data. It's hard. There's a lot of data out there. I mean, coming from and working with countries or places outside, there's a huge wealth of data that we have here in America, And I think the more we can utilize it and apply it and understand it, better decisions we can. And kind of one of our philosophy in our company is if you don't measure it, you don't grow. And I think that's really a great philosophy. You know, as more and more tools come out in terms of software and whatever, the more we do it, the better. And I guess where we're seeing in kind of our tools in the market is, is how do we stay on top of it? How do we watch things change and how do we get ahead of it? Yeah, I don't know. In terms
I
of, yeah.
I like that if you don't measure it, you don't know how much you've grown. So that's a great point, and um, great insight here today, David.
Thanks for having me, Ann.
David Boussios of DecisionNext. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today and joining us.
Thanks. Have a good week.
For you and our audience, we thank you for tuning in. For previous Feedstuffs 365s, be sure to check out the live and on-demand section of Feedstuffs 365. For Feedstuffs, I'm Ann Hess.